Welcome to Regal in Real Life. So, today I'm going to talk to you about how I remained regal in spite of a very challenging few weeks with a colleague, where, to be honest with you, their behavior was borderline bullying and very microaggressive, very much um, stepping out of their position, considering that we are both on the same level in terms of our positions. So, I found this person I've found that this person over the time that I've known them has been, quite an interesting, eccentric character, just generally. And I think that many people experience them in this way. Their communication is quite different, shall we say. Um, you know, this individual may not always understand how they come across, and I want to first acknowledge that before I kind of go into my own experience of this individual. To say that there can be two things that are right at the same time. So one, yes, a person may not have much perception of themselves. They can have communication challenges, things of that nature, but they can also be microaggressive. They can also be rude. They can also have bias. They can also be racist. Um, those two things can exist all at once. And I suppose if we're thinking about the first point, when that exists, these racist, microaggressive behaviors, comments, etc., can actually be even more compounded because that person has even less insight into themselves. So, whilst I understand, that we can all see things differently, and some of us, myself included, would consider themselves to be neurodivergent. I don't believe that that is an excuse for certain behaviors that some people like to exhibit when dealing with certain types of people, like myself. Okay, so that being said, it has been a challenging week, or 2 weeks rather, where I have felt highly visible. But also, I always feel highly visible as a tokenized, marginalized person within my team, the only Black woman within my team, the only woman of color within my team, and probably one of three within my faculty. So I work within academia. So I feel highly visible, but I also feel in recent times that I am representation, much needed representation for our students. Um, and it's something that I have noticed, just in terms of how they relate to me, how they communicate with me, and how they have started to share some of their challenges with me, upon, I suppose, realizing that I am an ally and someone that they can trust with this information. Now, that can be very difficult and put me in quite an awkward position at times. And that is where I have been dealing with a lot of my own kind of stress and concern and worry about how to manage things from an ethical standpoint, viewpoint, but also from a personal level of understanding the impact of racism and understanding the impact of bias and how it is actually manifesting for these students, whether that be the awarding gap, which is, across UK higher education institutes, where, white students consistently are awarded higher grades at the end of their degree, than Black students, and that this is, documented, researched, and it is a widespread problem, and it's no different in the institute that I am working in. Where this is a problem that has been highlighted by the university leadership team, and as something that they would like to address and would like us to, work on, figuring out how we can change this, and exactly how this is happening. Now, the how this is happening part for me is very interesting because, without being rigid in my views, without my own bias being taken into account, and when I say bias, I mean the bias of my observations, the bias of what I see day in, day out in terms of how students are treated, or the disparity in which students are treated, the inequities that I see going on day to day. That is my bias. There is no other bias. So, yes, that is what I see. And it's very difficult not to feel personally, impacted by racism. It's difficult to not feel personally impacted by racism, um, whether we want to call it implicit bias, subconscious bias, whatever you want to call it, it still has an impact on individuals and on people. We can give it all of these fancy names and terms and say, oh, that's microaggressive. When really it has huge implications and it has huge impact on people, their psychological well-being, and again, how they're able to move forward through their course and achieve their goals and their dreams. So whatever the terminology, I just want to highlight how impactful it is on the individuals who are experiencing these disparities and inequities within higher education, which is widely documented. You can go and find the literature that backs this up. Not that we should need literature to back up what we are saying and what we are experiencing, both as staff and as students within higher education institutes. And I had my own personal experience over the past few weeks with a colleague who, is very undermining. She, although we are on exactly the same level and we're both quite new to academia, for some reason, she perceives herself as being somewhat, I guess, more senior to me, and therefore able to dictate what I do and when I do it in terms of my workload. So, we had a bit of a conversation. I keep calling it a run-in, but that sounds very dramatic. In fact, words were just said. My specific words actually were, you do realize that I have my own workload to prioritize, So that was that. Oh my goodness, what is that? What is that noise? So anyway, sorry about that. This person tends to think that they have some type of authority over me or wants to question my leadership. And when I say leadership, I mean in the sense of we are all leaders within this space due to the roles that we're in as lecturers. We are there to lead by example. We have high responsibility, as well as within our profession. So anyway, this person was very unhappy about the fact that I had put a boundary in place with them, and proceeded to cry in front of senior management about this interaction that we had had, which all I'm going to say is go and read the book White Women Tears, because that's my first instinct and thought. It's very textbook. It's very much giving, I want to create a narrative where I am vulnerable and this person is a horrible, bullying, angry Black woman. So, I'm a person who likes to be regal in real life, and, act with grace and treat people with compassion and kindness. However, what I will not tolerate is my kindness being seen as weakness, which is, I think, something that has been occurring. I tend to keep to myself. I tend to be a person who can get on with very many people, regardless of background, regardless of age. That is just who I am and who I've always been. And I think that this has been perceived as some kind of weakness. My upbringing, my childhood, my life experiences have been quite tumultuous and quite challenging. And so the calm that people see now is not exactly the calm that I've always been. I have learned to act in grace and to regulate myself in certain scenarios and situations. And I find that actually that calm, that kind of, I guess, unbotheredness that people are perceiving is actually more triggering towards them. And that instead of it kind of de-escalating a situation, sometimes it escalates it even more. And that was my experience these past few weeks. But I'll come back and tell you a little bit more about that